mo. That's one way of controlling the access over the attribute na name. Ipaagi nimo og kaning gitawag nga access methods. Okay? So, typically, okay, pwede sa nimo i-remove na lang. Okay? Kung ganahan ka nga di jud ma-access. Okay? So, you'll only be providing the getters. So, in that way, ang access nimo over this attribute nga name is simply to read it. Okay? So, wala kay write capability over that attribute. Okay? So, that is basically how other programming language implement the control over certain attributes nga dapat read only lang o dili pwede ang write only. Okay? And basically po, the good thing about having to use methods is you could actually perform validation. Okay? So for example, ganahan ka mag-set og name sa person. Okay? Now, let's say as a validation, di ka ganahan nga gamiton ang gwapo. Okay? So pwede ka magbutang dira guys og condition na every time ang new name ma-equal to the word gwapo, pwede ka mo comment bakak. Okay? Yeah, di nimo i-allow nga ma-modify ang name. Okay? So that is what is so good about you making use of method. You can actually perform validation. Okay? Now, let's say for instance, kanang when you are talking about um, colors baron. Okay? So ang colors na to usually i-define siguro sa uban using string. Okay? So if you define mo using string, probably you want to limit the number of colors na pwede magamit. So pwede ka mag-create dire og condition. Okay? Para mo trap sa mga entry nga dili pwede sa imong system. Okay? So that's one application or one advantage of using methods. You can perform the so-called error checking on your entry. Okay? Kunya, ang nakabati lang po ani niya kung mo gamit kag aning access method name, okay, is the way we represent our data in our code. Okay? Let's say, if you want to modify the name or the attribute name of your object P, mutawag kag method. Okay? Kunya, kung mubasa ka sa ihang attribute, di ba, you also call the method. Okay? So, sa C nga programming, probably it's acceptable. Okay? Naanad ta ana. Kay that's basically the only way we could do it in C. Okay? Pero, here in C Sharp, okay, batik magod kaayo nga magsigi ka gamit aning open close parenthesis. Okay? Let's say for example, kung mo read ka og data, na kay open close parenthesis which is supposed to be for the attribute pero walay sulod. Okay? Na kay set name pero wala ta maanad usually ka nga kung naa kay modify nga attribute. Usually when you modify something, you use the assignment operator. Okay? But since that's a function, the only way for you to know nga that is used to modify certain attributes in your object is because of the word set. Okay? So, kana guys, kanang set dira o get, actually that's just a naming convention. So that means if you are to implement a getters and setters attribute or a getters and setters method for certain attribute, dili na siya mo error if you don't use this format na paon nimo ang attribute name niya butangan lang nimo word nga get or set depende sa accessor method nga ganahan mong button. Okay, so you can name it any way you like it. Okay, pero labi na sa Java naanda na dyan na siya nga if you are to create the so-called accessors o kaning getters ug setters, you prefix it with the word set o get to indicate that those functions are used to modify certain attributes that was declared as private. Okay? So, mo ni medyo naka-awkward niya tan-aw. Okay? When using getters and setters method. Okay? So, to solve that problem, okay, C Sharp, okay, made a way to modify certain attributes using the common concept of using assignment operator. And the way we read certain attributes nga wala siya open close parenthesis. Okay? So usually kung magtan-aw tani mura ra man naghimo nga attribute sir nya giset lang to public. So kung ani lang igo ra ta mag-assign og name, mag-read og name, then why problema? You can just set that attribute as public. Pero what if kailangan nimo nga naay error checking? Okay? Or what if ganahan ka nga ang imong access over that attribute name is only for reading, dili writing. Okay? So just declaring the attribute name as public won't be enough for that. Okay? So here comes properties. Okay? So unsa maning properties? Okay, so property definition has basically a declaration of the access type. So of course, nakaset to public. Okay? The type, in this case, string, and the name or the identifier. Okay? Kunya, naa siya'y statement block. Okay? So this is how properties are declared. Now, looking at the way how properties are declared, mura ra siya unsa guys? Tigtan-aw nimo. Mura siya gi-declare just like that of a variable, di ba? Kay na access modifier, na data type, then na name. But instead of ending with a semicolon, it ended with a statement block. Statement block nga makaingon ka nga mura lagi na siya function. Pero di isa na to matawag nga function kay nganuman wala man siya open close parenthesis after the name, which is a signature for functions. Okay? So that is basically the nature of properties. Okay? Mura siya og attribute, mura sad siya og method or function. Okay? So naa sad siya iyahang kaugalingong syntax for creating the so-called properties. Okay? Now, unsa man yung gitawag niya nga implementation? Okay? So, here in the implementation, anha nimo niya ibutang kung unsa tong mga functions that you might be doing. And also, when you are working with properties, you need to have the so-called storage. Okay? So, ang storage is basically the field, okay, in your class. Okay? Now, for, how do you call this? As a coding practice, okay, we make it a habit na kung unsa to'y gigamit nimo nga identifier sa imong attribute, when you create a property for that attribute, is just basically the same identifier with its first letter capitalized. Okay? So again, that's just a naming convention. If you don't follow it, wala ray problema. Dili mag-error ang imong program. Okay? So, mo na siya ang ikaduha nga requirement for creating properties. You need a storage. Okay? Unsa nang storage? Basically, that storage is a variable that would handle the values nga imuhang i-set or the values nga imuhang i-get from this variable. Okay? So kung magtan-aw ta, mura jud siya function, di ba? As the example nga ato ang gi-show ganina. Okay? Nga naatay variable, naatay function that we use to control our access to that field. Nga butangan lang nato og getters ug setters. Okay? Now, here is what makes properties different from the so-called getters and setters nga method. Okay? Naatay keyword inside the implementation nga gitawag natong set og get. Okay? So, kaning set, as what we can see, wala gyapon siya open close parenthesis, the same as with your get. Wala na siya open close parenthesis. But, naagyapon siya statement block. Okay? So, essentially, when you create a method, you need first to create a storage. So, ang storage is just basically a variable of the same type as that of your property. Okay? And when you are naming your property, of course, it's only practical to set it to public. Otherwise, what's the use of having a private property nga di man gyapon day mabasa sa ubang class? Okay? So, next is your data type, then your property name. Okay? So, inside your open close curly block or kaning code block nimo are the keywords set and get, and each of these keywords set and get will also have their corresponding statement block. Okay, so unsa may gamit anang statement block. Okay, so inside the statement block ana nimo i-define, okay, the things that you might be adding dito sa imuhang getters and setters method. Okay? Now, just a very simple example of how setters are utilized. Okay? So, sa setters, as you can see, this is not a function. There is no argument. Okay? There is this so-called hidden argument we call as value. Okay? So that value, di jud na nimo makita diri nga variable as an argument, just like that of a method. Okay? So that is a hidden argument, that is a keyword in C#, nga si C# kabaw na unsay pasabutan na niya. Okay? So, if you implement this setter, okay, all you need to do is kung ganahan ka nga si name, assign na nimong value, you can use the assignment operator and simply assign any string value to this attribute name. Okay? So, essentially okay, just like that of a setter method, kaning property, okay, would act as a link between your outside class, okay, with the attribute inside this class person. Okay? Yeah, kanang value dira, though were not able to see it declared as a parameter, it exists. Okay? So essentially, imbis nga mo gamit kag open close parenthesis, okay? When you have there a value being assigned to that property, that value can be accessed with the use of assignment operator. Okay? So as you can see guys, di ba, mas nindot siya tan-awon as compared ganina nga moingon kag p.setName open close parenthesis din anha nimo ibutang ang imuhang parameter. Okay? So karon as you can see, when you access that attribute name, okay, you access through the so-called properties in C# and access it just like that of a regular attribute. Okay? So, mao na guys ang sa setters. Okay? So, again, since naa kay statement block diri, pwede ka ka-provide ana og access modifier. Okay? Or rather, pwede ka ka-provide ra og not access modifier but um, entry validation. Okay? Now, how about for the getter? Okay? For the getters, as you can see, again, it is somewhat similar gihapon to the function without the open close parenthesis. Okay, so it also makes use of the keyword return so that whenever this property is called, it could return a value. In this case, ang i-return niya nga value is the attribute name. Okay, so again, take note, the name of the property need not be the same as with the declared storage. Okay, pwede ra na lain-lain og name. Basta ang importante, for this property, there is a storage for you. Okay? There is a storage declared inside the class. Okay? Para pag-store sa information for this property. Okay? So again, when you call the getter, you call the getter just like that of an ordinary attribute. Okay? And again, as what I have said earlier, when you are using the set, okay, you can add entry validation to it. Okay, so before you assign the value, you might want to provide some error, okay, for the entry validation labi nagkana suwat og pangan niya ganahan jud kay mogamit og gwapo niya kasukaon kay ka kay kabaw kang di tinuod, so imuhang i-trap dira daan. Okay, nga kung naagi mo gamit og gwapo mo comment kag bakakon. Okay, so pwede kay na siya diri guys, or pwede pod kanang let's say magpa-input og number niya mo butang jud og letter. Okay, so that is something that you should also trap, okay, in your code. Okay, so again, the good thing about using property is you will have the ability to control the access over those information. Okay, pwede nimo himuong read only. Okay, para mahimo siyang read only, so that means you don't specify the set. If you want nga write only, so you don't specify the get. If you want to provide a read and write access, then you implement the set and get. Okay, so mao na siya guys. Okay, for you to have a full access over certain attributes. Okay, so here is an example, okay, of what I have told you earlier nga not necessary nga magbutang jud ka diri og attribute to store the age, because the age as we know it is what pwede nimo ma-derive gikan sa date of birth and given the day to day. Okay, so pwede jud na nimo i-compute, okay, base sa date to day, so updated pa ang imuhang age. Okay, so in this example, as what you can see, dili pwede i-set ang age kay nganuman. Okay, mas dako man ang chances kung mas dako man ang chances nga masayop kung naa kay set ka access over your age. Kay when you talk over your age, that is not supposed to be filled up manually. Kay it could always be derived gikan sa imuhang date of birth. Okay? So in C#, there's actually this class called datetime. Okay? So pwede na nimo magamit si datetime nga class guys to create an object that is able to how do you call this, represent the year. Okay, so looking at this example, how did we implement this? Okay, so again, you can compute for the age by simply using this statement. Okay, so you get the year today, okay, based on the date and time. Okay, now looking at this, guys, what can you say about today? Okay, what does this remind you of? Nga na-access nimo ang today nga information. Hello, guys. Okay, unsa na siya nga topic nga to ma-relate. Okay? Wala ta mag-instantiate. Di ba? For us to be able to access today that year. So, unsa ni si today? Okay? So, today there is also an example of a property. And basically, it is a good example of how static keywords are utilized. Okay? So essentially, it's an information that you get by accessing the date time. So since common man na siya nga attribute na pwede nimo makuha ang date today based on the system clock, they made it static. Okay? So you don't need to instantiate it. Okay. So after that, okay, gi-minus na to ang date of birth. Okay? So pag-access na to sa date of birth, we get the year also, then ato alang gi-subtract sa year today, okay, to get the age. Okay? Unya unsay sunod na tong gibuhat. Okay. So kaning sa imuhang tawag ani object nga date of birth, there's actually a method nga gitawag natong add years. Okay? So sa kaning add years, ato ang gi-assign ang age today, okay, sa age nga gi-compute katong pag-subtract sa date karon o sa imong date of birth to get the birthday. Unya, gi-compare lang ang birthday nimo with the date and time today. Nganong gibuhat man na siya nga part sa code. So, there are cases manggod that when you want to know the age, dili kaigo nga basta lang nimo isubtract ang year sa date of birth, di ba? Kay let's say for instance, nataw ka is May baron. Okay? Nya ang gibasihan nato diri is the year today. Okay? So essentially, let's say in compute, you are 20 years old. But kung ang birthday nimo is May pa, is your age 20 years old? Dili pa no. Daginuton pa jud na nimo nga oy 19 pa ko. Okay? Next month pa ako ang birthday. Okay? So mao na ang purpose ani diri, guys. Okay? Nga after subtracting the date of birth with the year today, gi-add na siya balik, okay, sa to ang date of birth, niya gi-assign og variable para ma-recompute nato as to whether ni sobra ba ni siya sa date today. Kay kung sobra siya sa date today, that means nilapas imong edad kay wala pa ang buwan sa imong birthday. So mo nang gisubtractan siya before the age was returned. So this is again a good example of why we use properties. Okay? So take note. Sa tuang class person, we only have one storage nga gigamit, which is the date of birth. But because of this data, we were able to derive other data such as the age. Okay? So probably pwede sad ka mag-create og class person, di ba nga na first name, middle name, full name. Nya mag-create kag proper first name, middle name ug last name. Then you'll also be creating another property called full name that would extract the first name, middle initial, and the last name. Okay? So walay additional attribute nga imong gi-add to store that information because those information pwede nimo ma-derive from existing one. Okay? And why do we need to do that? Okay? Of course, to save memory. Okay? So take note. Every time nga mag-add kag variable diri guys, that is an additional memory consumed by your object in the heap memory. Okay? So karon medyo maghuna-huna na pud sa data o memory utilization. Okay? Kay mo may nagkabati ang ubang application ron ba. Abi ang mga computers nagkakusog. Okay? A lot of programmers di na sad maghuna-huna sa hardware utilization sa ilang application kay moingon ra mag-aw kung ganahan mo gamit ang tao ani sa among application nga nindot kaayo mapugos jud siya upgrade sa iyahang resources. Okay? So which is should not be the case, di ba? So dapat suportaan pud gihapon nato ang mga karaang hardware para mas dako ang imuhang market. Okay? So imagine lang, di ba, sa mga Android app. Okay? Every time nga mag-download mo bag-ong games, are you not frustrated to see nga, uy, para maduwaan ni nako nga game, dapat mag-upgrade kag phone. Okay? Kay di na magamit imong Nokia nga 3210. Char. Okay? So anyway, mo na siya guys. Naapa mo guys. Okay, sige. So anyway, aside from that, okay, properties can also be static. Okay? So for your property to be static, it must be accessed only through the type name. Okay? So here is an example of, again, a property that was declared static. And ang atong storage also should be static. Okay? So, in a way, di ba, just like the rules of accessing or of a method accessing attributes on your class, if you have a static method, you must only access static fields or static attributes. Okay, so in this case, okay, since we are creating a static property, so ang ma-access ra pod nato are static fields or kani atong gitawag na storage kunuhay for the property nga revenue. Okay? So mo na siya guys. Okay? So take note lang ang keywords. Kung get, ang pares ana niya return. Kung naa kay set, ang pares ana niya is ang value. Okay? And how to access your static property? Just like accessing your static fields. Okay, you just call the class name, then use the dot notation to access your property. So of course, you have to take note, ang access modifier, kung naka-private na siya, di pod na nimo ma-access sa gawas. Okay? So, would it be possible to make use of private? Okay? So, typically useless ang property kung imuhang gi-declare as private. Okay? Okay, what is the purpose of having a property if it's not gonna be accessed outside the class? Okay? But if ever ganahan ka nga i-declare siya as private, pwede ra gihapon na siya guys. Okay? Sa ato ang properties. But take note lang, okay? If you have declared your property as public, applicable na siya to your set and get. Okay? So, gi-cascade na siya implicitly. You don't need to declare it here. Nga public set, public get. Okay? So, anhiraag dun sa declaration sa property. Okay, so take note lang, when declaring properties, walay open close parenthesis. Okay? So, mura ra kag declare sa dani og method minus the open close parenthesis after the name. Okay? So, mo na guys ang properties. Okay? So, it provides an advantage, okay, over the use of your private fields and public accessor pattern. Okay? So, di na ka magproblema if, let's say, for example, you only want to have that field red. Dili pwede maraitan. Okay? So, you don't need to make use of functions because we have a cleaner syntax na pwede magamit for our code. Okay? And that is to the use of properties. Okay? And, kani di ay, this only works for the new version of C#. Okay? Murag, I think this will not work with Sharp develop. Okay? So anyway, para watay problemas compatibility, okay, you can just make use of the notes nato dire of how we make use of getters and setters. Now, if let's say for instance, okay, ganahan ka mo create og getters and setters lang, pwede ra na inganiyon ninyo guys, get colon set colon nga dili na ka mag-create pa og open close curly brackets to define its function. Okay? So automatic na niya mahibaw-an nga when you say get here, igo ra na niya i-return. Okay? Ang imuhang property name. So no need to create a storage because this itself will become the storage. Okay? So anyway, mao na guys si setters and getters. Okay? Or kaning gitawag nato nga properties in C#. Okay? And probably usa sa mga important topics nga wala nato ma-discuss was how do we handle kaning gitawag nato nga mga exceptions. Okay? So, exceptions. Unsa tong exceptions gani? Exceptions are like errors in your code that causes your entire program to crash. Okay? So, for that problem, okay, we need to make use of the so-called try-catch statement. Okay? So, just to provide you guys with a way of handling exceptions, okay? So, in a way, this exception statement has also been used by functions nga try parse. Okay? Kahinumdum mo atong try parse guys. Nga namo ingon kag int dot kani try parse. Okay? So unsa may kalahian aning parse o unsa may kalahian aning try parse. Okay? So kung magtan-aw ka sa iyang documentation, when you use the parse, there is a tendency that you will generate this so-called exception. Okay? So, unsa man ang gitawag nato nga exception. Okay? So, let me show you an example lang. Let's say console.readline. Okay? So, let's say kung basahon nato, pwede nato ma-convert siya into a number. So, igo ra tawag int that parse. So int that parse is basically somewhat similar to the function na convert. Okay, under sa convert class. So int x baron is equal to int parse. So kaning int pila man siya by default int 32. Okay? So int 32. So let's say for example console.writeline. Okay, para ma-display lang nato ang ato ang gibasa. So, let's say So, ano lang. Okay? So, running the code. Okay? So, kung mag-input ta, kung sakto atong input, let's say it is something that is convertible into a number, then basahon ra to niya. O wa na to makit-an kay paspas kaayo og ni except diretso. So, butangan lang na to. Okay? So again, in this output, 1, 2, 3, enter. The input value is 1, 2, 3. Now, let's say tuyo na to. Okay? Kay wa ta magbasa sa instruction nga dapat di ay number ang ato ang ibutang. Kay wa man sa instruction, igo ra man blink. So, nag-type lang sa kagbisag unsa. Okay? So, from there, ni-crash ang imong program. Okay? Ni-create siya og kaning gitawag nato nga exception nga problem. As a result of performing the conversion to a particular string that is not actually convertible into a integer type. Okay? So usa na siya sa mga problems nga dapat natong lihayan when you are developing your programs. Kay uwaw kaayo makit-an nga in the middle of your demo naa kay entry nga nasayop nya wala na nimo gi-handle properly, your program crashes. Okay? So how can we handle it properly? Okay? So aside from that, another possible problem when you are using conversion class or kaning parse is, let's say for example, ang number nga imuhang gibutang dira is not something that can be stored inside an integer nga 32 bits. So, ito ang gituyo og padako pagayos number. Boom. Okay? So, as you can see, wala na siya mo display sa okay? Wala na siya mo display sa value kay nganuman. Mao pud niyang error. Value was either too large or too small for int32. In this case, based sa ato ang entry, it was too large for an int32 na data type. So, ni-generate gyapon siya exception. So, if you have tried this probably in CodeChamp, ni-crash na jud ni siya. Okay? Mo-generate na siya daghan kay error. So, one example of a runtime error. Okay? So, of course, this is something we really don't want to experience. Okay? So, mao nang instead of using try-parse, instead of using parse, we instead make use of try-parse. Okay? Do you still remember this katong previous demo na to last time? Hello? Ayo. Naka-remember pa mo ning try-parse? Wala na. Okay? An alternative way of using a conversion method instead of using the so-called instead of using convert class. Okay? So you use try parse instead. So of course, base sa ato ang previous discussion about parameter passing, okay? You make use of the out keyword para pasahan sa result. So in this case, we type the out keyword, then the result ibutang na to sa X. Okay? Now probably something again, a syntax na medyo dili kay ta komportable gamiton. Kay usually, when you convert something, that method should be found on the right hand side of the equation, and ang iyahang assignee should be placed on the left hand side of the equation. But in this case, ang ato ang assignee, or rather ang value to where we will put the result is part of the parameter list. Okay? So unsa may i-return ni try-parse? As you can see, ang i-return ni try-parse is a boolean type. Okay? Nganong boolean type man? Because the boolean type will indicate if the conversion is successful ba. Okay? So if it returns false, that means this didn't work out properly. Okay? So pwede ka mag-add diri og condition like that of an if statement, okay? So that you could actually provide instruction to your user as to what is needed to be done. Okay? So let's say in this case, okay, mo na tong buhaton. Okay? Nya magbutang pud tag alternative. What if mag-false? What will I do? Okay? So kung mag-false, pwede ka muhatag og laing instruction sa user as what happened, why the conversion was not successful. So probably maingon kag uh, check your entry. Okay, so of course, na may value si x. Okay, so something like this. O asa naman yung paris ano. O kung ano na yung paris. Okay, so something like that. Okay, so this is typically a better way, okay, of reading entries from the user, especially when you are working with numbers. Okay, so as you can see right now, your program, okay, is functioning as intended. Okay, and wala na siya mo crash despite the fact nga naay possible exception nga ni occur, like ang entry nimo was not converted into a number. So your program is still running gracefully and you can exit gracefully. Okay? So ikaw may makakontrol. Okay? So mo na try parse. Okay? So that's a built-in function. Okay? For your primitive data types. Or kung unsa man gani nga data types nga makita nimo sa convert class nga pwede nimong ma-convert into. Okay? So kana if ganahan ka mo gamit sa mga humandaan, okay, nga function in C#. But if di ka ganahan mo gamit, kay let's say wa ka aware, at least naa kay option nga mo create og imuha. Okay? And that is by making use of the so-called try catch nga statement. Okay? Try catch nga statement. So unsa man ning try catch nga statement? So diri sa try anhin nimo i-declare guys tanang possible part sa imong code that could generate an exception. And the catch statement is probably where you will declare the things that you need to do whenever an exception occurs. Okay? So, manong erase na ko. So, balikon ta to. Ano siya ganito? Nagamit ta og parse, no? So, let's say x is equal to int dot parse then console dot read line. Okay. So kana. Okay. Put niya. What do we do next? Okay. So if dili successful ang ato ang conversion, so probably anhin na nato ibutang sa catch. Okay? Unsa maibutang nato sa catch? Okay? So let's say for instance maybe gamit gyapon kag console. Okay? And you may want to know what is the cause of the problem. Okay? So, pwede na nimo tawagon ang kaning object na exception X and you can write the message. Okay? So, take note, this property message will return to you the message that explains the reason for the exception. Okay, and that is basically in string format. Okay, so kaning ani day nga symbol guys nga makita ninyo sa Visual Studio baron or sa Sharp Develop, that is an example of a property nga gibuhat sa C Sharp. Okay, so what are properties? Katong gidiscuss na to ganina. Okay, so those are how properties are created. So pwede na to i-catch ang problem. Okay, so take note, when a possible problem is detected, okay, that particular block in the statement would likely be ignored by the compiler. Okay, so if nganong nami naman lang. Okay, so message. So in this example, let's say for instance, magbutang taog number that is not convertible, an entry which is not convertible into a number. Okay, and as you can see, dili man ako'y gabuhat ana. Okay, but that is the value returned by this property message when it was able to detect an exception in your program. Okay, so as you can see again, wala mo crash ang imong program. Okay, you were able to detect possible exceptions that could cause your program to crash, and you were able to still run your program gracefully despite the fact nga na exception nga nahitabo. Okay, so na-detect niya input string was not in correct format. Okay, unya what if katong kuan nilapas sa integer, let's say in 32 baron 987654321 123456789 charo. Okay, as you can see, you can still know why the exception occurred. Okay, so dili fix ang message, magdepende on what type of exception ang ni-occur. Okay, unya there's actually a third one which is finally, which is optional. Okay, pwede ra na nimo dili i-implement, but if ever gani there is if there is a thing that you need to do regardless of what is happening, let's say for example kana baron si read console, okay, be it successful or wa, iyaha jud nang i-execute, pwede na nimo ibutang diri sa finally any part of the statement nga imuhang i-execute regardless kung na successful ang pag-execute under the try statement or kung naa man gani nahitabo like an exception occurred. Okay, anything that has been placed under the finally statement would get executed. Okay, so maor na siya guys. Okay, so pwede ra po natin ibalik diri ang katong console dot write line. Okay, para lang i-display ang value ni x. So mo na ang value ni x. Okay, so again, kung sakto lang ang value nga gibutang, boom. Okay, so we were able to display, and as you can see, successful siya. Gi-implement ra gyapon niya ang console read line para makita gyapon nato ang output. Okay, so if magbutang tag error like an entry that is not convertible into a number, okay, so again misod gyapon ta sa console read line. Okay, bisan pag misod siya sa catch statement. Okay, so pana guys. So what else? So makita ninyo guys nga when an error occurred in this line, di ba? Wa na ni siya gi paran. Okay? Kaya nga naman, naa na may nahitabo nga exception under this line of code before the other lines. So automatic din na siya stop. Okay? So kung napa mo yung mga statement, declarations nga gi-perform dira, expected dili na siya ma-execute and it will be ignored in your code nga nahitabo to siya. Okay? So anything under the statement block is good as not executed whenever an exception is detected. Okay? So that guys is how we could that is how we can control, okay, how exceptions are handled in our program and let our program exit gracefully. Okay? So para dili basta-basta mo crash ang program. Okay? So very useful na siya. Okay? So in the event nga naamoy part sa code dira, nga let's say kung masayop kag entry, maka-cause nga mo crash ang program, gamitin nag-try catch. Okay? So far, question? Okay, so properties of exception handling. Okay, so this is just an introduction to the basics of exception handling. Okay, para at least when you do your code, okay, naatay pamaagi nga makontrol in the event nga naatay mga sayop na entry. Okay, dapat imuha jud gihapon na siyang i-take note of. Okay? Kay magsuway niya ta og kwan niya graphical programming soon. Okay? Ikahuman na to sa OOP. Okay? So far question before we go. Okay? Para maka-continue na mo sa activity. Kay murag only 11 respondents on the static laboratory exercise.
Sir, naaday nakasubmit sa 10, sir nga. Wala pa nahuman sa 10B. Pwede ba daw nga ikuha ng kan?
Kinsa man. Kinsa man.
Kwan, sir,
Kay
Dagle, Texon o Lucero ni sir.
Dagle, Texon o Lucero. Lucero na so wala mahuman. So ilahang kwaon balik ang ilahang gi-submit. Wa pa ni mahuman na nang nagi-submit.
Yes, sir.
Nasubmit
pa sila, sir, kaya naratol sila sa deadline.
Nasubmit lalahos.
So Lucero ug Daglera.
Texon, sir.
Texon po, sir.
Lucero, Texon ug Dagle. Sige, ako ang i-delete inyong response na ara makamoy copy. Ara. Ano man? Wait, sir. Dagle. Okay. Dagle. Yeah, Lucero. Okay. Ug kinsa po ganito? Texon? Sakto ba? Texon?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so walay sulod. Sige. So, kana ako nang gitang balik ang inyong submit. Okay, so ang uban so anyway, ako lang mag-check ani kung sakto ba ni naghimo ra man sad ko og driver daan para ipadagan ako aning class ninyo kung sayop gani sayop. So sige, so far question about properties, dali ra ang properties no. Okay, so mas nindot tan-aw aesthetically ang imong code, okay, with properties, though you can still use the get and set methods, but when it comes to how nice tan-awon ang imong code, okay, niya mas user intuitive tan-awon ang imong code, then make use of properties. Okay? So anyway, before we go, can we turn on our camera, please? Okay. So si Hernandez, naabas Hernandez. Si Lucero, wala si Lucero, no?
Burnout daw sa ila, sir. O zero big
Print
sun.
out sila, ha? Okay. Asa ni ilahang lugar de?